I frantically looked around the storage unit for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could hear keys jingling. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever was coming would hear it. I pressed myself against the wall next to the door and held my breath. The footsteps stopped right outside my storage unit. Through the thin gap under the door, I could see 2 feet in worn sneakers just standing there. They knew someone had been in their space. After what felt like an eternity, the feet moved away, but I could hear them pacing in the hallway. I waited another 10 minutes before carefully opening the door and peeking out. The hallway was empty, but I noticed something I'd missed before. There was another storage unit at the opposite end of the hall with its door slightly open. I should have left immediately and called the police, but I was terrified and curious about who had been living below me for months. I crept down the hallway toward the other unit, and what I found there explained everything. This second unit had been converted into a more permanent living space. There was camping equipment, a small camping stove, multiple changes of clothes, and several bags of non-perishable food. But the most shocking discovery was a collection of items that clearly didn't belong to whoever was living down there. There were driver's licenses and credit cards with different names, keys to various apartments, and photos of different people who I assumed were other tenants in the building. This person wasn't just stealing from me. They were systematically targeting multiple tenants, collecting information and supplies from all of us. I found a calendar with detailed schedules for at least 6 different people, noting their work hours, when they did laundry, when they went grocery shopping. My information was just one column among many. This person had turned tenant surveillance into a science. The most disturbing item was a journal detailing their methodology. They would identify buildings with accessible basements, find storage units that weren't regularly used, and set up camp. From there, they'd gradually learn the routines of tenants above them and carefully steal small amounts from each person, never enough to raise immediate suspicion. According to the journal, they'd been living in our building for over 8 months, moving between different storage units when necessary. They had keys to multiple apartments, which they'd somehow acquired or copied, and knew the daily schedules of everyone in the building. I was reading through this journal when I heard the basement door open upstairs. Heavy footsteps echoed down the stairs, and I realized the person was returning. I grabbed the journal and some of the ID cards as evidence and looked for an exit. Thankfully, there was an old coal chute that led to an alley behind the building. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to climb out just as I heard the person entering the storage area. I ran around to the front of the building and called 911 from the street. When the police arrived, they found the person still in the basement. It turned out to be a woman in her 40s named Linda who had been homeless for several years. She developed this elaborate system of living in building basements and surviving off small thefts from multiple tenants to avoid detection. The police said she'd been doing this for years across different buildings throughout the city. She'd target older buildings with accessible basements and poor security, then gradually integrate herself into the building's ecosystem. She was incredibly careful and systematic, which is why she'd gone undetected for so long. Linda had keys to 4 different apartments in our building, including mine. She'd somehow managed to copy them, probably by taking impressions when tenants left keys in obvious places, or by watching landlords. She'd been entering my apartment regularly, always when I was at work, to steal small amounts of food and supplies. The journal revealed that she'd been inside my apartment over 40 times in the past 8 months. She knew my schedule better than I did, knew what TV shows I watched, what foods I preferred, even what time I usually went to bed. She'd been living parallel to my life without me knowing. The police found evidence that she'd been targeting our building's tenants for months. Missing items that we'd all blamed on forgetfulness or other tenants were actually part of her systematic theft operation. She'd taken something from everyone, but always kept the amount small enough to avoid suspicion. What really disturbed the police was how sophisticated her operation had become. She'd mapped out multiple buildings across the city and had detailed files on dozens of potential victims. She'd turned basement squatting into a professional operation with backup plans and escape routes. The landlord admitted that he'd been aware of homeless people occasionally sleeping in the basement, but hadn't realized someone had set up a permanent residence. He'd installed better locks and security cameras after Linda's arrest, but the damage to my sense of security was already done. I moved out of that apartment within a month. The thought of someone having detailed knowledge of my daily routine, having been inside my home dozens of times without my knowledge, was too disturbing. Even though Linda was arrested, I couldn't shake the feeling that my privacy had been completely violated. The experience taught me to pay attention to small details and trust my instincts when things seem off. Those missing food items and strange sounds weren't just my imagination. They were signs that someone was systematically invading my life. Linda received a sentence of 2 years in prison, but the judge noted that she'd likely been doing this for much longer than anyone realized. The police estimated she'd targeted over 30 different buildings and hundreds of tenants over the years.